Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
Hi, my name is Scott Baldwin, and I am the Global Business Continuity Program Manager for eBay. eBay is an online auction site, and we're a global company. We have over 140 business offices all around the world. So there's always something happening somewhere. It's a very exciting position to be in. I started in Resiliency in 2005. And since that time, I've had the opportunity to work in pretty much every aspect of resiliency, from business continuity to disaster recovery, crisis management, vendor management, etc. One thing that I'm excited about is the opportunity to work in a field that I think is emerging right now, which I'm going to call resiliency architecture, which is the support and development of planning tools, communication tools, integration with other systems, metrics, reporting, all around supporting resiliency specifically. So I've had a lot of opportunities to work in a lot of different areas. Before I entered resiliency, I was a software engineer for 13 years. Specifically, I was a Java developer, which is an object-oriented language. Object-oriented development really comprises of building components that are reusable in different contexts. And I think this background has really informed my program development and process development and business continuity. I'm always looking for ways to take ideas and processes and combine them and put them in such a way that we could reuse them in different ways. One of my favorite things to do is talk to colleagues around the world, other practitioners, and I'll always try to make time to speak with my colleagues. I love to learn about how their programs are developed and what works for them, what doesn't work for them. And so most of what I talk about today are going to be things that I've gleaned from my own experience and also working and talking with other people. What I've tried to do is synthesize these ideas into these components that make up this framework. Each of these steps could easily take an hour or more to talk about. So I'm going to have to talk at a strategic higher level in order to get them all in. So before I start, I want to talk about a few notes about this program. First of all, I want to recognize that there is no single correct way to build a business continuity program. What I'm introducing today is just one way. It may not be the same way that you are used to or what works for you, and that's fine. This is just one framework that I've been able to test and has worked really well for me. Next, even if you decide to follow this framework that I'm introducing today, I want to call out that no organization is the same. So there's going to require some customizations if you do use this. You might listen and decide that certain parts of what I'm talking about wouldn't quite fit in your organization. And that's probably very likely for a lot of people. So these are just general guidelines so that you will need to take them and kind of tweak them to fit into your organization. And then finally, this framework I'm going to talk about is completely scalable. It scales up and it scales down. However, there is a certain amount of effort that is required to implement this framework. So if you have a small organization, maybe 1,000 people and certainly less than 500, you might reconsider using this framework because the effort involved in just doing the traditional business continuity planning from a central corporate perspective may be easier than the effort required to implement this program. On the other hand, if you have a large organization, you'll find that the larger the organization, the more return on investment you'll get from using this framework. I think as you get larger and larger, the payoff becomes exponential. So those are just some notes. And next I want to kind of talk about some terminology, specifically about some program maturity levels, the way that I use them. We have compliance, readiness, and resilience. These are the 3 levels of maturity that I use to identify my programs. And these 3 terms are ubiquitous in the industry, and a lot of people have a lot of different ideas. There's no definitive way that we understand these terms. So I want to spend a couple of minutes to describe what each of these levels mean in terms of this framework. So first is compliance. And compliance is the absolute minimum requirement for a functioning enterprise program. This is, if you don't have the compliance level, in my opinion, you don't have a functioning program. Compliance really can be thought of as if an auditor came in, what would they expect to see as a baseline? And to me, there are 3 areas that they look for. The first are the activities. These can vary a little bit, but this is a typical list of the basic BCP activities. The first is executive communication. So there needs to be reporting up to the executives and approval process and all that. So there needs to be a communication process in place. Second, there needs to be a business impact assessment. I know that there is some discussion around the BIA, et cetera, but again, this is a typical list, and I think the BIA is expected in a compliant program. Third is the business continuity plan, and this is kind of the heart of a business continuity program. It's the recovery strategies. What do you do when there's an impact? And finally, the validation exercise. You need a way to validate that the plans are appropriate, realistic, and they do what they say they're supposed to do. So those are the basic activities. The next component is it needs to be sustainable. You can't just do the activities once and walk away and think that you have a compliant program. There needs to be a regular update schedule, maintenance schedule. It needs to be a living program. And finally, it should be enterprise-wide. Now, this doesn't mean you need to have business continuity plans at every department, but if you do, if there are departments outside of the scope that you're working with, that needs to be documented. There needs to be justification why you're leaving certain areas out. In short, the whole enterprise needs to be in some way addressed by the program. So that's what I call compliance, the compliance level program. Next is readiness. And to me, readiness just means that the business's ability to respond to a business disrupting event. So how well is the business ready? And first of all, you need to have compliance in place. And anyone that's familiar with compliance will know that you can have 100% compliance and still not be ready to respond to an event. It doesn't equate that way. However, even though compliance does not mean readiness, I strongly feel that you cannot be truly ready if you're not compliant. And there's a couple reasons for that. I think first, just the act of compliance alone teaches and trains the business on what they do. Doing the BIA, the business continuity plan, and the exercise, all those things kind of enculturate and inform the business about what business continuity is. And I think that's important. Second, I think that we get a lot of really great data when done correctly. The BIA and the BCP and the exercises provide a lot of important information that we need to use during a response. So those are 2 reasons why compliance needs to be in place. Another reason is if you somehow respond to an event, but you don't respond within the required time frame, say, so it's considered a failure, and you don't have a BIA or you don't have business continuity plans, you don't have compliance in place, and there's an investigation. That investigation will most likely begin and end with the fact that you're not compliant, that you don't have these things in place. So it's important for a lot of reasons to be compliant. But other than compliance, for me, readiness is 2 components. First, the business needs to own the responsibility of the business continuity response. It needs to be something that they feel ownership. It can't be from a corporate level. It needs to be from the business level. They need to be the first line of defense. That's the first component. The second component is creating realistic, useful, and really well thought through functional exercises. Now, these exercises are different than validation exercises. Validation exercises are things that just test your plan to make sure it's realistic and useful. What we're talking about at a readiness level are exercises that build muscle memory, that get people used to making decisions under adverse situations. So it's slightly a different idea. We're not testing a plan, we're training. So that's the readiness level. And then the final level, resilience, that's really about being proactive with risk, looking out, identifying risk, mitigating that risk, and really ultimately, hopefully, avoiding the impact of that risk altogether. In order to be resilient, though, we do need compliance and readiness in place. If a risk does get by us and impacts the business, we can't say that we're resilient if we have no mechanism to respond to that. So we definitely do need to be compliant and ready. Additionally, one of the things that we want to be doing with in resilience is working with other risk groups. They're the subject matter experts for their risk. So we would be taking their policies, their controls, and we would be doing risk assessments on our own business groups through BIAs or other assessments, and identifying any gaps that we see and trying to mitigate those gaps. So that's kind of a proactive approach as opposed to the first two, which are more reactive. I'm currently writing a paper on business continuity and organizational resilience. And one of the differences with business continuity within an organizational resilience framework and outside of it is I found that corporate groups that are doing business continuity are most likely not in an organizational resilience framework. The corporate groups that are within an organizational resilience framework are typically training the business, not doing the activities. So that's just one kind of hallmark of a corporate group that is in the organizational resilience level. Okay, next I just want to talk about two common scenarios that I have seen in my own experience and also heard a lot from other people. The first is called the program reboot cycle, and the second is called compliance lock, or what I call compliance lock. So the program reboot cycle is pretty simple, really. It starts with a brand new program. We get new management, new tools are brought in, and we create this really great process. And then we start to implement it. And typically, this is where it starts going wrong. We never get to a compliance level, typically. We never get all the activities conducted throughout the enterprise, or if we do, it's not sustainable. So what happens is it stalls out because we're fighting against the business too much. And at some point, we recognize there's a failure, or the management recognizes a failure, and there's a reboot, meaning a lot of times new management, new tools, etc. And like an example of this might be, you come into a program in 2010, you change up the tools because the planning software just obviously wasn't good enough. You have a new process in place and you launch it. Well, a couple years later, you're still struggling. So you bring in a consultancy, and they come in with their group and they do a complete BIA and a business continuity plan, and they do exercises and they leave. A couple years later, that program has completely died. It was not sustained. You didn't have the manpower to sustain it. So 2016 comes and the whole group gets let go, or the management gets let go. New management comes in, new tool, etc. So this is what I call a program reboot cycle, and I've seen it over and over again. One of the interesting things about this is people don't really know that they're in this until they look back, because everybody that's implementing a program thinks they're the ones that are going to get out of the cycle. So I would say until you have a compliance level, until you have spread out the program through the whole enterprise and it's sustained, it's been maintained, you may be in a program reboot cycle right now. The second one is compliance lock. So compliance lock is when you have put the program out to the enterprise and you have 100% compliance or near 100% compliance. but it requires 100% of the effort of your internal group. The corporate group is maxed out trying to maintain this compliance level. I call it like it's sinking or swimming, because if you stop swimming, in other words, if you stop doing the planning and exercise and the updates, the program will sink. So nobody can really mature the program, because year after year after year, the corporate group is busy updating and testing, and then next year, same thing. This is, it's a compliance level program, and I don't think it's really sustainable, although I've seen it go on for years and years. It never really progresses. So those are two of the common problems I see in programs. I've heard different variations, but it really boils down to these two kind of issues. So both of these have the same core root cause, which is lack of business engagement. That's really the secret to making a program work. So today we're going to talk about this framework, again, these four components. And the first one is gain executive support. And this is, to me, very interesting, because if you read any best practices, if you read any standards, take any course, any book on business continuity, every single one of those resources are going to tell you the first important thing you need to do is get executive support. Everybody knows this. This is BC 101. You need executive support. So I find it so interesting that when a BC program fails, one of the top reasons listed is always lack of executive support. So here we have a situation where we all know that you need executive support. There's all this information on it, yet it consistently is one of the biggest reasons that programs fail. So I'm very interested in things like this, and this is some kind of gap. What is the reason that we cannot get the correct kind of executive support? So let's look at some executive support types, and I think there's basically two. First is something I call actual executive support, and that's where you have someone on the executive leadership team or the board of directors who actually is passionate about business continuity. They're actually excited about it. It could be that that's just something that they're passionate about, or it could be you just went through an audit or an incident and did poorly, and so they're on fire. If you do have somebody that is passionate on the executive leadership team, you are very fortunate. This is not a really common situation, and if you find yourself in this situation, you need to take advantage of it. So ask for headcount, ask for training, ask for support, ask for tools. Get everything you can, because most likely this type of support will not last forever. Either something else will come up that will replace business continuity as the passion for the person that's excited about it, or that person might leave the organization. And once that support is gone, you're left with nothing. So if you have actual executive support, take advantage of it. The second kind I call official executive support, and this is found around financial institutions, government agencies, healthcare, anything that's highly regulated. We have what I call official executive support. And this typically comes in looks like a policy in place that's been approved that says you shall have a business continuity program. And there's certain elements to that are in the policy and usually regulated in some ways. The downside to this is that it really kind of points and supports a compliance level program. When an auditor comes in, that's what really they're checking for, a lot of the compliance level stuff. So what I see a lot is a program getting to compliance level and getting stuck there, because there's not a lot of interest to mature the program. They just want to make sure they're checking the boxes and making sure that they are doing what they need to do based on regulations. So neither one of these supports are going to give you exactly what you need in the way presented right now. So while any executive support is good, the one thing needed for this particular framework to be successful is agreement and official policy approval giving total BC ownership to the business. So you may already have something in place like this, but I'm talking making it black and white, being extremely explicit about ownership. Who owns this responsibility? So we're talking about if there's a BC audit result, the business owns that result, regardless. If there is a disruption response, whether good or bad, the business owns that result. Compliance, if they're out of compliance, the business is the one that owns that result. Any and all business area BC responsibility is owned by the business. This is super important. And again, a lot of times we talk about this, and this is something we say, but you need to concentrate and focus on this one component and get that approval. I call this the golden ticket. This is all you need to start this framework. You don't need to go in week after week with videos of hurricanes and earthquakes or plead with them. All you need is to get this one piece of documentation that you can then use to get into the business. One kind of interesting thing I found about executive support is that executives will give support once they see that there's a winning program. Once you start being successful, that's when you start getting real support. This is unfortunate because a lot of times we need that support while we're struggling. So this process will begin that upward spiral. We'll start getting successes, then we'll go back to the executives and we'll get more support. But this is all we need to start with. So you might have to, hopefully not, but you might have to argue for this executive support. There's a lot of arguments for it, but the two that I think are the strongest are, the first one is the business is the expert at what they do. During an adverse situation, who do you want to be directing recovery? Someone in the business continuity world who has some knowledge of finance, legal, or HR? Or do you want somebody that has 20+ years experience and knows how to do what needs to be done during all kinds of situations? Obviously, the business has to own that responsibility. They have to be the ones that that are making those decisions during those during the adverse conditions. That to me is no-brainer, and it just needs to be articulated. The second is really about the reality of the situation. If you own a responsibility, you are much more likely to make sure it gets done than if you don't. So if the business doesn't feel like they own the responsibility of business continuity, they will help while it's convenient. But what happens is something will come up that they feel they truly own as opposed to business continuity, and they will stop assisting, and you will lose that engagement with the business. So without the business owning business continuity, you're not going to probably be very effective long-term to get the work done. Okay. So first thing is gaining executive support. Super important, but really, again, not something that is super complicated. We can begin this framework with just the ownership. So now that we have that piece of authority, the authority to put this ownership onto the business, the next step is to understand where in the business do we put this ownership. And this is very important too, just for the logistics of creating a program. So let's say that this is your organization, okay? And just for the sake of argument, we're going to say that you have, I'm going to call L1 to L4. And there's SVPs at the division level, VPs at the business unit level, directors at the department level, and managers at the process level. Again, this will vary based on your organization, but just for this example, and let's say we have 12 SVPs, 70 VPs, 200 directors, and 1,500 managers. So we're going to say also that we have a corporate group of 4 available people to assist to create this program. So what we're going to do is we're going to take, using the golden ticket of the ownership, we're going to place that ownership on the business and create programs within the business. So where do we put that? So I have found in my experience, that any business continuity professional with 5 years experience should be able to manage anywhere between 15 and 20 programs successfully. Okay, so using this calculation, so C, the corporate team times 15 to 20 equals the number of programs supportable. In this example, we have 4 people. So we can support 60 to 80 programs, okay? So if we look at that, we got 4 people. We're gonna look at the business unit level, the VP level, because we have 70 business units, 70 VPs. We can support 60 to 80 with our group of 4. So we're gonna place the ownership at that VP business unit level. And we're going to, again, fully put that ownership right there. Now, what if you're alone? Well, even if you're alone, you can still manage 15 to 20 programs, okay? So in this case, you'd have to go, well, there's 12 SVPs, so we're gonna have to build the program at this level, okay? And we're gonna have the SVPs own the responsibility of these business continuity programs. So a few thoughts on this. First of all, the ultimate goal of this is to get down, make the whole company resilient. Remember, we're trying to get to the resilience level. Resilience has a lot to do with enculturation, with the whole company individually being understanding of the concept of response, recovery, avoiding risk, etc. So the goal is to get this down to the very bottom level, to the process level. So the higher you start, the longer it's going to take to get to your ultimate goal, because there is a component of train the trainer where this is going to be pushed down. So again, the higher you start, the longer it's going to take. However, there is usually a program sweet spot, and that is you want to put the program in a place that has enough authority. If you get too low with the program, get too tactical, oftentimes it can be it can lack the power and authority that you need to run a successful program. If you get it too high, a lot of times you have this operational program that is competing with strategic initiatives, and that can also lead to business continuity being kind of pushed to the sides. So you need to find a level that has enough authority, has enough power behind it, but maybe not so high that the leader of that organization wouldn't really want to deal with operational stuff, okay? And then finally, obviously, you want to customize this to your own organization. I'm using reporting levels in this example, but you might have a geographic dispersion, or you might have lines of business or subsidiaries or some other way to divide your business, which is, you know, perfectly fine. All right, so now going back, we have the authority to give the business the ownership. We know where we're going to give the business the ownership. Next is actually implementing your program. So implementation really looks at, there's 2 components to that. The actual delivering of the ownership and the program building. And I split out delivering ownership because I think this piece is very important. It's kind of like the golden ticket we talked about. It's a small detail, but the emphasis is very important, because how we deliver this ownership makes a huge difference, okay? So let's talk about delivering ownership. Normally what I have seen, and again, even if the corporate group has articulated that the business should own business continuity, even in that situation, too often I see the corporate group going to the business and asking for their support, saying, we're doing this business continuity, we need your support. We're asking them for a favor. That works somewhat, but what works way better is granting a favor to the business. So it's all in the way we approach this. If we approach it as if, will you do us a favor, that's one thing. But if we are granting a favor, the business engagement goes way up. It's an amazing little thing. Just a change in your approach can make a huge difference on the kind of engagement you get from the business. So in this case, what we would do, because we're working on the VP level in our example, I would visit each and every leader of the group, in this case, each VP, and I would give them the ownership. So this is how I do it. So I have something called an executive overview. And I explain what this golden ticket is. I explain that they're personally responsible now for the recovery, the ability to recover, the ability to stay compliant, audit stuff. All of this is completely on their plate. This is something they own. So basically what we're doing is we're creating a problem for them so that we can fix that problem. And it's interesting. So the problem is that most leaders have no idea how to create or maintain a business continuity program. So I have actually, it's not uncommon that the leaders, the VPs I'm talking to, will have some physical manifestation of discomfort when I'm describing that they own the program now. Their eyes will get bigger. Most often they'll start to argue with me, tell me they don't have time for this, that this is not, et cetera, et cetera. But we have this golden ticket, so there is no real argument. However, I don't let this go on too long. I immediately follow up with, yes, it's your responsibility, but tell you what, we have a program in place. If you work with us, I can guarantee you that I can create a program that will keep you compliant, that'll make it so that you have someone to go to in the middle of the night when something goes wrong. You'll have an effective initial response. I can do this for you, but there are certain conditions. And it is amazing how quickly most leaders will take you up on that. They will then, you're in a situation now where you're doing them a favor. You just, for a moment, you put this issue on them, and then you come in and say, I'm going to fix this for you. But there are certain conditions. And as long as the leader doesn't personally have to deal with this, normally they make those conditions happen. So let's talk about the conditions that we need in order for this business leader to be protected by us. The first is, we ask them, okay, we're going to create a program. What we need from you is a business continuity manager to run that program. Notice I didn't say coordinator, I didn't say champion, not a planner. It's very interesting. Just the use of the word manager and program manager makes a huge difference on the type of person that the leader will give you. When we used to ask for coordinators or someone to interface with, we would get admins, secretaries, analysts. But when we explain that this business continuity manager will be acting and speaking on the leader's behalf when it comes to resiliency, when we put it in those terms, and they're going to be running a program, the term manager typically in most organizations actually carries some weight. So the leader is a lot less willing to put someone that is not already a manager in that position. In fact, we have gone from, like I said, admin, secretaries, analysts, to now our typical BCM is a director level. We have VPs, we have senior directors, VPs, we have a CFO who is a BCM. We have a country president who is a BCM. A lot of the people, some of the BCMs actually are the leader themselves because they have really absorbed the understanding that they are personally responsible for resiliency, and they don't want to put that on anyone else. They want to have that responsibility themselves. Of course, business continuity manager does not mean that they need to do the work themselves all the time. It just means that they are responsible for making sure that work gets done, okay? So the other thing is the person, the selected BCM, does not need to know anything about business continuity. They should be someone that's respected and has an understanding of the organization, but we will train them in everything they need to know about business continuity. So that's the first condition. The second condition we ask for is support the program. This means send an email out to your group. Let them know what's happening. Let them know who the new BCM is and what they're doing, and let everyone know that you feel that this is important because we need the support and engagement of the business. Also, make sure that the BCM, that their goals and objectives, their annual goals, officially include this new role. Because when it gets down to it, if there are two things that need to be done and one they're going to be graded against and one they won't, they're going to do the one that's graded against. So we want to make sure that they have the motivation to make sure that they do the BCM work. So these are the conditions. And again, for the leader, this is a big relief. we're going to do everything. We're going to do all the heavy lifting. Just give us someone that we can train and also support us. And the level of support that we get through this process it's just amazing. It's like night and day. Again, it has to do with how you deliver this ownership and then how we're offering them a favor, a service, okay? A lot of groups don't like to do this for some reason. I kind of think that people feel like they're working themselves out of a job. By training the business, they're feeling like, what are we going to do? Well, remember, this is compliance level we're talking about. We don't want to be in the compliance business. We want to be in the readiness and the resilience level. So if we can get the business to handle compliance, then we can work on the maturity of the program. Now, the guarantee. If the business leader provides an engaged BCM and makes the BC program a priority, the corporate group promises, like I said, a compliance level audit ready program. They don't have to worry about it. An internal group ready to respond to impacts. So what we have done is inexpensive, it's easy. We have created a certification program at eBay. What that means is, and we're pretty serious about this certification is not a pat on the back, it's not a well done. It is our way of honoring our promise to the vice president and saying, okay, you gave us this person, they worked hard, they've learned all the basics to business continuity activities. This is our stamp of approval that this person knows what to do. They know how to stay compliant and they know what to do in the first 24 hours of an incident. So, you know, it does create, in some people, having a certification also does create more engagement, but that's really secondary. The real thing is honoring our promise. Okay, so building the program now. We want to train the BCM. So again, the business needs to be the first line defense. They need to understand what needs to happen, how to activate their plan, what their plans are, the recovery strategies for the first, I'd say, 24 hours. They're going to ensure that all the BCP compliance activities are completed. Again, they don't necessarily have to be the ones that do the activities, but they need to make sure that it gets done. And eventually, we want them to be good at auditing internally. So they can look at the BIA, they can look at the BCP and review it. And of course, the corporate group is going to review it as well, but we want to get the BCM to a point where they are expert enough to be able to review and correct a BIA or a BCP. Our methodology that we use is a watch, participate, own kind of methodology. So what we'll do is our corporate group will go in with the BCM and we'll conduct a BIA on a department. And the BCM will just watch. And if there's like maybe 6 departments in that BCM's business unit, maybe the first 2, the corporate group will perform. The next 2 will do a handoff. We'll do part with the BCM, part with the corporate group. And maybe the final 2 will have the BCM complete it themselves with us watching and supporting. This is kind of how we do all our activities. It's kind of a watch, participate, own methodology. That way we're actually getting the work completed while we're doing training. And then again, like I said, certification. We don't give this out easily. Now, another thing about certification, which is pretty neat, is it becomes a new type of metric. We have the typical metrics around business continuity, which are, you know, what percentage of businesses have a BIA, BCP, et cetera. Well, the readiness metric, a new thing can be how many BCMs are certified. That means how many programs really are mature or getting to the point where they are ready to respond to an incident. So that's another bonus to the certification program. So again, like I said, we have a train-the-trainer approach. So we have the BCM and the programs at the VP level, and we're training them, but they go down and they select, and they don't always do this, but they typically, what they'll do is they'll select people from the level below them, and they'll get actual people to do the planning. And at that level, they can be admins. It's up to them who they want to support them, because we have someone in the business auditing and making sure that the program is run correctly. So again, at some point, the BCMs will be training people in the department below them, and we call them BC leads. and they'll be part of the recovery team for their area. So that's how the pushing down to the process level occurs. So now we have, in our little house, we have compliance. Compliance is now done by the business, right? And because it's done by the business, we have the business ownership column. So readiness is halfway there. We're halfway to the readiness maturity level. We still don't have advanced exercises or resilience in place. So we need to keep working on it. So the fourth component of this framework is engaging the business and maturing the program. So to engage the business, there's a lot of different ways. I tell my team all the time that you need a lot of different tools because what works on one person may not work on another person. So you have a lot of different ways to engage the business, and hopefully you're addressing the majority of the business. It's important to keep them interested. As a developer, I learned that I had a lot of latitude on what work I could do first. If I had a lot of competing priorities, usually what got done first was the thing I was most engaged with. So it's important. You want to make sure that these BCMs and the business continuity programs in the business are engaged. So to create a sense of community, first of all, building these programs at the business level will enculturate the business. They have taken ownership. They've taken a sense of identification, and it's really a big part of it, pushing it down there. But we also have things like community of practice meetings, where we bring them all together and we talk about a recent event. We'll have guest speakers and things like that, or a training session. You have to make sure that it's worthwhile so they don't feel like they're wasting their time. But for some people, this is a really good way to approach it. We have the newsletter. And again, we talk about recent events in the newsletter. There's more of a passive way, but we do have a BCM spotlight every month where we do an interview with one of the BCMs. And again, this is just to get this community feeling identified with what they do. We really want, the goal of this is when an event happens, we want the BCM to stand up and not to say, I don't know what to do, but to say, okay, this is me now. I own this. Let's get going. That's what we're trying to do, is get that person to identify with that role. We also meet regularly with the leader, with the VPs in this case, to provide status updates. And we really encourage and push the BCMs to completely own this process. We go in as a show of support to the meetings, but we want the BCM to present. And one of the great things that come out of this is when the BCM is presenting and showing gaps or issues, the program or our concerns become the BCM's concerns. As they articulate it, they actually take ownership and say, we need this, we need to mitigate here and there, and they actually become more engaged. So we always want the BCM to be the face of their program. Additionally, we want the vice president or the leader to also identify that BCM as their first line of defense, not the corporate group, but the BCM. And then finally, we meet monthly with each BCM. We do quarterly update cycles. So we hold the groups to whatever quarter they have chosen to do their updates. But outside of their update cycle, we meet with them monthly, just to keep them up to date, make sure that don't feel forgotten. But during their quarterly, their quarter cycle, we meet with them weekly, and just to kind of give them positive feedback and to help them with their activities. So an interesting thing, as the BCMs and the business become more expert at creating and updating and maintaining their compliance level plans, the level that the corporate group, the effort that we need to put out gets reduced. So when I said we need a business continuity person can manage 15 to 20 programs, that's like all they're doing is managing programs. But as the business starts taking on a lot of this compliance stuff, the level of effort that we need to do drops. And pretty soon you start finding yourself with more and more bandwidth. And this just kind of says the same thing. So what the first thing I want to do is, when I start getting bandwidth, is taking one of the people that was holding the business's hand. Now that the business is able to go by themselves, and I want it to develop a robust, realistic training program. To me, that is a second component to a readiness level maturity. So the first thing I'm going to do is get somebody to we can't expect the business to spend the amount of time that it takes and have the expertise to create really good exercise programs. So one of our professionals are going to take that, and they're going to go around the company, and they're going to start testing the critical areas. And again, this is to create muscle memory and to help with the business's ability to just think clearly during an event. But once that gets done, we start having more time, then we look for other areas where we can mature the program. Vendor management, dependency mapping, seat relocation program. There's a lot of places, I think, that you can look and find where you can have improvement in your program. So finally, there's risk. So we want to get to the resilience level. Once the BCM program is in place, what we want to do is start working with other risk groups. We want to get the controls that other risk groups who they're like InfoSec, that's their profession. We take controls from them, and we use our risk assessments in our network to identify gaps in those controls. And then what we can do is we can start mitigating those gaps. Now, this does a couple of things. First of all, we're being proactive. We're looking at future risk and trying to minimize the impact there. But also, we are now training the BCMs and the BC leads and the whole business community about a whole new world. Now they're starting to understand the other side of business continuity, the resiliency part, the risk part. So that's really important. So now we have compliance, readiness, and resilience. We have the whole maturity model in place. And one thing I want to just articulate now is the power and leverage that you at the end of this program will have. You might have a group of 4 people, but through that 4 people, you have the ability to mobilize maybe 450 trained resiliency people. So there's probably no other group in the company that has this level, this penetration in the organization. I can send out a risk assessment, and I can penetrate down to the process level and get results back quicker than anyone else in the company. It's actually a very powerful network that I have in place. And as other risk groups understand this, and there might be some worry about stepping over the lines, et cetera. But if you're very clear that you're going to let them have total ownership of the policy and controls, but you want to be a risk service provider because you have a network that no one else does, then you can actually get more involved in the whole risk area as a business continuity group. So that's my program. I think I'm supposed to turn this over to someone for discussion on this point.
Thank you, Scott, for this highly informative webinar. Before we continue with the question and answer session, I would like to inform all the attendees that PCB provides trainings and certification services for ISO 22301 Introduction, Foundation, Lead Implementer, and Lead Auditor. This training is designed to provide you with the required knowledge on how to continue to operate effectively within a short period. For more information, please visit our website, pecb.com/training. We will continue with the question now. We had many. The first question is how to take the business continuity responsibility at executive level.
I'm sorry, say it again.
How to take the business continuity responsibility at executive level.
Okay, so again, as I talked about before, getting executive support is a difficult thing, and I think the traditional ways people have gone about it are hit and miss. It's not really the systematic approach doesn't seem to work very well. Again, what I think works the best is success. When you have a program that's successful, the executives will support you. That's why I say don't expect full executive support. If you get it, that's wonderful, but don't let it be the reason why your program fails. That's why all you want to do is make sure you get that one key thing, which is the ability, the authority to give the ownership of the program to the business. That's all you need. In fact, they could approve that and then forget all about it, and you can still go on your way. Again, as you succeed and as you do this great work, it'll bubble up to the executives, and that's where the real support will start coming. That's where we get more money and etc.
Another question is it advisable to have someone as a business continuity manager and still continue doing other activities, example, the risk manager, etc.?
Yes. So thanks for bringing that up. I wasn't clear enough on that. So the business continuity manager is not a full-time position. And that's one of the questions I always get is how much time will this take? Now, if we're talking strictly business continuity, which is people, processes, places, not technology, but just business, I tell them maximum 10% of their time. So these people are usually, a lot of times they're operations people, someone who has a very good strategic understanding of the group. So I say, yeah, it's going to require 10% or less of their time. So absolutely, these people have a regular day job, but we want to also get them to identify with this responsibility of making sure that the group is ready. So yeah, it's totally okay to have someone in risk, or again, it's usually someone in operations that typically is picked for this role.
Thank you, Scott. Due to lack of time, we will answer only one more question, and the rest of the question will be answered by email by Mr. Scott. So another attendee asked if he can have a precise sense of what would be the executive communication.
So I executive communication a couple times. So depending on which sense you mean, but the first one I was talking about was on the compliance level. There is something called executive communication, and what I meant by that are reporting, maybe compliance reports. How well is the business staying compliant? Are they updating their activities? Are they testing, etc.? That would be one kind of communication. Coming down from the business or from the executives would be things like support, emails to the group that says, this is an important thing, we need it to support. That is what I used when I said executive communication during the compliance portion. That's what I'm talking about, is basic reporting on how the group is doing. I know I talked to an auditor just recently, and that was one of the things that they looked for, is there a line of communication, and basically letting, especially when you put ownership on a leader, we have that golden ticket and we give the ownership to a leader, we're saying you personally are responsible for this program. Because of that, it is critical that we keep that person informed of the status, because we're basically making it so that they are on the hook. So they have every right, they should understand if there's anything not going right in the program or if things are going well. So frequent status updates would be executive communication. I also had something called executive overview, which is that meeting that I have initially with the executives to let them know that they are responsible now for the business continuity program. And that's just basically telling them what business continuity is, what their responsibility is, and how we can help them. That's basically that piece of it.
Once again, thank you, Scott, for this excellent presentation. I want to thank all the attendees as well who have joined us today. We hope you enjoyed this webinar. And in the upcoming days, we will send you the recorded link, which will be uploaded on our official YouTube channel and in our website as mentioned above. On behalf of PECB and Scott, thank you for joining us today and enjoy the rest of your day.